what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of background in terms of this case-based reporting project that's being done as a collaboration with Regan Streif and the CDC. Um, we're using OpenMRS and working with OpenHIE and benefiting from PEPFAR funds. Um, the the um, the goal of this is basically to design a module that implements a push for HIV case surveillance. So the idea is that folks at the CDC, including Zen and Eric, um, believe that one of the most effective ways to do kind of population health and improve population health around the world is to drive data, aggregate data from the field and from the front, quality data from the front lines. And one path toward that is to improve case-based reporting. And so this particular project is in its second phase, um, and focusing on HIV case reports as kind of the first use case. Um, the intent is that there's a surveillance officer, someone with a role at a particular implementation, and they are watching for potential new cases of HIV or other trigger events that are of interest to public health, like someone who's failing their regimen or lost to follow up um, or is switched to second line treatment. Things that are on a large scale, when looked at in the aggregate, can be very helpful in terms of guiding where resources need to go for public health. Um, so the the first phase of this project was to create a module that would allow the surveillance officer to generate and create these case reports electronically and help them deliver them. We wanted to take an approach that leveraged existing functionality as much as possible instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. Um, we created this kind of event mechanism leveraging some of the reporting tools that were already within OpenMRS, and wanted to leverage, also produce some meaningful discussions between OpenMRS and OpenHIE about standards and how we architect things and dealing with security and privacy. And like I said, driving public health decisions from the front line. So these slides are getting a little bit dated, but essentially, phase one was creating the module, and we'll show you kind of the Wycliffe will demonstrate what that module looks like, and then we are currently in the process of um, taking the case report that's generated from the module and putting it through an OpenHIE stack. So the vision is that you have multiple implementations running a case reporting module. They are using the module to detect potential case reports. A surveillance officer is looking through that queue and deciding, yes, these should be sent off as case reports. And when they hit the submit button, that case report is sent electronically to an HIE, and that allows for the public health, the ministry to collect um, data, case reports in a shared health record. And so we've been creating the electronic documents and going through the process of getting that plugged in and running through the HIE, and have made a lot of progress on that over the last few months. Some of the triggers, the types of things we're looking for, are new cases of HIV, someone diagnosed with HIV, someone diagnosed with disease caused by HIV, which, if you understand HIV, it's an infection. Just having the infection doesn't necessarily mean you're sick, um, but it does affect the immune system, and so there's diseases that can come. So the infection and then getting sick from the infection are two different triggers. When someone's put on treatment, people that are missing surveillance testing, switch to a second line or failing treatment. For whatever reason, the treatment is stopped. Um, the virus is not being suppressed, so another kind of form of treatment failure. And then someone lost a follow up or patients that are dying. And so those are kind of the first set of trigger events that we're creating or using in the module. And the notion is that there are these things are happening and detectable in the data within an OpenMRS instance, that the module detects those events, takes any patients that have one or more triggers, puts them into a queue. Surveillance officer takes a look at that queue and monitors it, and from that can generate a case report that is electronically sent to the ministry via their health exchange. Um, this is a kind of a busy diagram, but was kind of some of the initial description of what does a surveillance officer do at a site. You know, what are the steps involved in monitoring for these trigger events, and kind of this flow was kind of a big part of what the module is replacing. So I think with that, I have some snapshots of the module, but I think rather than me going through the snapshots, I think what I'd like to do is let Wycliffe share his screen and kind of show what the module looks like.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, let me share my. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
So I'm gonna do a quick demo of basically what happens that is end to end from when a trigger is when an event occurs that results into a trigger, and then we submit the case report for that trigger into a health information exchange. So I have an OpenMRS instance, which in this case would be like the point of care system where the recording observations for patients. And that is where we have some scheduled tasks already running, and they'll pick up on any things that they see match certain criteria, which in this case would be queries that are run against the database periodically, and pick up any matches and create reports for those patients that match those criteria.
So
Uh,
it's worth noting that the module actually installs those scheduled tasks by design. So when you install the module, you get, 10 different scheduled tasks that way, while it can regularly monitor for those trigger events, it gives some control for the administrator to say, oh, we want to run this particular query once a week or daily.
yeah, so we have a trigger that uh, looks at the database and sees which patients have been marked as dead, uh, and we'll create case reports for them. And this, from here, you can see runs every 20 seconds. I just did that just for the purposes of this demo. So we have this patient. So just so you know, this patient already exists in the health information exchange. And when I submit a report for them, the assumption is that we'll get that information into the SHR in the HIE. Uh, so let's mark this patient as dead. As you can see from here, this is my queue. So the module has this extension to the refer app, and you can see previously submitted queue items. You can view uh, basically what report items have been generated in the X, number of hours, days, or minutes. So as you can see, we have no case report for this patient called Wilhelmine. Yeah. So anyways, so let's mark this patient as dead. Um, let's say as of yesterday, uh, the reason we don't know, and then we can save that. So after 20 seconds, we should have a queue item added to this list shortly. As we wait, you can see that so the SHR is another OpenMRS instance that is running on another machine. As you can see from the IP here, it's a different machine. And the point of care system is on my machine, as you can see from here. So the goal is to get this report into the SHR system here. So let's refresh and see whether, okay, so we have the queue item generated. Can probably stop the, you probably don't have to do this, but I think there's a little bug with that this report will get recreated after you've submitted it. So I just don't want that to happen. So anyways, let's submit this report. So there is more information that you can include in the report based on the observations that have been recorded for the patient in the past period.
Wycliffe, can you note that your screen share takes a while? You're flipping through a lot of different screens quickly, and so it's hard for people to follow.
Sorry. So this is what the report is.
So can you go back to the queue?
So
and show the so you'll notice that some people may have multiple triggers because they've more than one thing has happened over the last week for that patient. So we don't file a separate case report for every event. We file a case report, and we can you can say this is because of A or A, B, and C that we're sending this case report.
Yeah, so if there is already a queue item, we'll just add another trigger item to it. As you can see from this report for Mary Thomas, you can see that there is 3 triggers for them.
And do you have an example of one? There's one with.
This is an example of a typical report that has all the data elements that we can submit. As you can see, we send their demographics. This shows that there were 3 triggers that were matched. And then we send some diagnostic data like their last 3. Actually, this is a little different from what it is right now. Right now, we only send the most recent recorded observation versus the last 3. In the beginning, we were sending the last 3. That is the last 3 viral load, the most recent CD4 counts, and the most recent HIV tests. We also send their WHO classification stage, the ARVs they enrolled on. If they've stopped any ARVs, we send the reason why they stopped. We also send the date of their last visit, and the case surveillance officer typically is the one that will go through the queue and say submit this or discard this. As you can see here, they can add comments and then they can submit. So let's go back and submit our queue item here. So I'm going to select this, and we can say cause of death is not known. So let's submit this. So so as you can see, our report has been successfully submitted in the and that entry for them has been taken off the queue. So what has happened, this message has been submitted to the Health Information Exchange. And when we go to our SHR system here, this same patient Wilhelmine already existed, but if they didn't exist typically, they would get created in the process. But this one already existed. So if you refresh the patient dashboard, as you can see, there have been 2 encounters created in the SHR, and one, well, there's a visit also, and 1 encounter is associated with that visit. And we can look at what has happened actually. There have been 3 observations, well, more than 3 actually, that have been created for this patient. So if we try to look for observations for this patient in the SHR system, as you can see, we have 5 observations created and 2 encounters. 1 observation is a complex ARBS, and this file here contains the complete CDA document that was submitted that contained the case report details. And another encounter is created with observations, that is the status of the patient, that they are dead. As you can see from here, the patient health status says the patient is dead, and the cause of death has been reported as other. And the trigger item that, in this case, the trigger item was the patient has died. So we create an observation in the SHR that, that encapsulates that information that the patient is dead. I know that it's kind of like a repetition, but
Yeah. But those are some of that is just a side effect of when you send a CDA into OpenHIE. This is what you get: is it parses the observations and it creates these OBS groups that contain kind of fragments from the CDA, like the text fragment, and then another file that has the whole document. Those aren't things that we are doing for case-based reporting. Those are things that are part of how OpenHIE behaves.
Yeah, so in short, what has happened actually is that this message was submitted to the OpenHIM, which is like the entry point, and the interoperability layer for the OpenHIE instance. And what happened, we sent this patient with the local identifier, and in between there, a request was made to the client registry to get their enterprise ID known to the SHR, and then it was substituted into the message, and for the local ID that is, and then it was forwarded to the SHR, and the CDA was parsed in the SHR.
So the point there is that if you are getting messages from multiple implementations for the same patient, that part of the job of the HIE would be to normalize those, and ideally, if it's known that that patient is the same patient across different sites, then the HIE would help ensure that there's one chart with all the data from multiple sites.
Yep, I think that's it for the demo. Thank you.
So I know there was one question of if we utilize program inside of OpenMRS. You now you're viewing. You viewed your view.
I did my view. So questions?
So one of the questions was, do we use program? And we're not really leveraging programs currently. Um, Currently the model is is that the triggers are driven by SQL queries. So you could adjust the SQL queries. We're not actually trying to create the perfect SQL query for these. It's more of a kind of a demonstration of what's possible, and so we haven't put a high threshold. Like right now, our queries for these HIV triggers are not. They're assuming that everybody in your system has HIV. We're not doing the the extra layer of saying, okay, someone has to be in the HIV treatment program before we consider them in the query. But that's one way the program could be utilized. Is you could limit in your queries, you could limit who would be triggered based on only those people that are in a certain program.
Mark, I might be a little bit slow. I'm still not clear. What is the purpose of the case report again?
The purpose of the case report is that case reports are already happening. They're happening in paper form, and so ministries, and this happens all around the world. People that are in public health that want to understand how treatment is doing. Are they successfully taking care of chronic problems or HIV, or they're used for particular diseases that are of concern in terms of public health, like highly infectious diseases. And the typical workflow is that a clinic or a hospital, when they see particular types of patients or certain events that happen, they are required to fill out a case report and describe, oh, this patient, this event just happened. This is the patient, and this is what happened, and send that to the ministry. And so the ministry collects all those forms and then tries to create a database in which they can guide their decision making in terms of, wait a minute, we're seeing a lot more of these cases now in the southern region. So what's happening? Is there a new epidemic happening there? Is there are we not putting enough resources there? And so that the case report is already an artifact that is being used around the world to report events, sentinel events to public health, and this is just kind of an electronic version of that, saying we have data about patients in the medical record. Let's look for these events within the data and help, instead of someone having to fill out a paper form, help create the form for them. And so the case report is the kind of the electronic version of that paper form that would go to the public health ministry and say, hey, we just had a new HIV case. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. Thanks.
So we initially started by sending JSON, but because we wanted to demonstrate using these data, not just generating data out of the module, but also to get it into an HIE. The current versions of OpenHIE are, while they're working on Fire-based implementations, they're really designed right now to accept CDAs, and so we switched to a CDA format. This gives you kind of a timeline of where we are. We defined the triggers. We created the module. We defined what would be in the case report. We needed some new CL concepts. We're making the presumption that implementations and the HIE would be using CL as just kind of a initial compromise in terms of, while mapping is supported and is possible, this is a prototype, so we just decided we'll make sure at least we can do it with using CL concepts. We added some additional features and created our CDA message, and now we're in the process of getting that into OpenHIE and getting it to a point that can be demonstrated. Part of our task has not been just to create this once in a black box, but what we're doing is Wycliffe is working through getting an OpenHIE instance set up, and then with the module going through that, creating a recipe that then Lisa at the CDC is essentially following that recipe and creating her own instance at CDC. So part of the goal is to have kind of a reproducible demonstration. And we're also in that process coming up with some recommendations in terms of any workflow issues we run into. We've been kind of joining HIE calls and learning and giving feedback along the way in terms of what we're finding out, as well as we'd like not only for folks around the world who would see value in this approach of case-based reporting, to understand how they can kind of start to leverage what we've done, how they can take the next steps in terms of what security needs do they need to be concerned about, et cetera. Our goal being that in this next kind of in a third phase, which we will be talking about soon in the next couple months, is actually pushing this from prototype to getting it kind of tested out in the field and toward actually production usage. So kind of this is I think more of what we were just talking about. And it has been an interesting and informative process. It's been good, I think, it's been good for us to interact more closely with the HIA community, and we've learned some things along the way. Like, for example, they had a version of the modules that kind of make up OpenHIE that were built against a kind of an unreleased version of OpenMRS. And so part of this process has help the HIE community kind of get that cleaned up so that we have builds that are working against actual released versions of OpenMRS and released versions of the modules within OpenHIE. So there's been a good back and forth and some good outcomes out of that.
Yeah, see, Jessica has a question. Yeah, in theory, case-based reporting should be able to cover other aspects and other diseases.
So the question was,
based on your queries.
The question was, can the module be used for other diseases? And yes, can you Wycliffe, can you show like let's share your screen again.
And so I assume that this module can have some flexibility that can maybe customize what's the concept I need to track, then to report. I don't know if I'm correct or not.
Yeah.
So in theory, as I was saying, this should be able to work for other things that you want to track, because it's really based on the SQL queries that you write. And I'm going to show you an example. You can just rewrite those SQL queries, to match whatever criteria you're trying to look out for. As you can see, if you go to the reporting, so as Barack was saying, we leverage this around reporting, and that is why this becomes reusable for other things that you want to track. So for instance, the trigger that we ran was HIV patient died, and as you can see, it's a SQL cohort query that basically just searches in the database for patients that have been marked dead since the last time the query was run. So as you can see, you can just change this SQL to match whatever you want and rename the,
So in application, the case reporting module really is a set of queries that are then they're run, and the output of the query is a list of patients that met the conditions for the trigger. It could be an empty set or it could be multiple patients. And what the module does is it runs the query. It will, any patients that are returned, any patient IDs that match, it will add to the queue of potential case reports. So really the fact that this is HIV is purely determined by the fact that there's two aspects. One is we've written the queries to be specific to HIV triggers, and then the other is currently the attributes, the data we send in the case report has been modeled around the needs of HIV. And Wycliffe, are those the fact that we include like the last viral load or the last CD4 count or HIV test? Are those things hard coded or are they configurable?
So those are hard coded, but yeah, if you wanted to make this, you know, behave in a purely generic way, because right now I don't think it's 100% generic. But
Yeah.
if you did want it to be that, you would have to, make such things configurable, like which data elements you want to include in the report.
Yeah. So you could use it for flu right now, but you would have to, while you could change and create queries for, say, detecting flu. Right now, we need to make the actual case report, the data that goes in the case report, we need to make that configurable.
Yep.
Sure. And why
So
do we?
the caveat for the queries is that they need to return exactly one column, and that column should be the patient ID or the person ID for the matched patient. That's the only caveat with the queries.
Yeah, and see, Paul has a problem with she doesn't see the difference in the and the organization isn't, it's the contractual.
Sure. So no, I was gonna say also that I've tried to keep this module as generic as I can, and that is, for instance, the those queries that get loaded, you can actually have your other queries getting loaded. There's a way it lets you plug in your other queries, and also when it comes to where, like for instance, you're asking why OpenHIE. Actually, that's also configurable. You can register your other. There's a way it's pluggable, as in where you want the report or what you need to happen when the report is submitted. So right now, when the case report is submitted, I've registered something that posts the message to the OpenHIE, but you can actually swap that out and do something else with the report. You can submit it somewhere else or take another action when submitted.
So the question was both: can we integrate with OpenHIE? Why did we choose OpenHIE? And that was just purely a decision to have something real, and it also had the side effect of also having some getting some a little more contact between the OpenMRS community and OpenHIE communities. So which the CDC wanted to see. So that was another reason it was chosen. Um, the the fire, we actually started out assuming we were going to create a fire message, but because the accepting fire messages right now in an HIE is kind of bleeding edge. We wanted to have a working demonstration. We chose for now to produce a CDA, but because that because essentially at the time we produced the case report, Wycliffe is using a library to generate the CDA that we could refactor that code or create an alternate handler, like introduce a mechanism to produce fire instead of the CDA. Right now, CDA was chosen just for pragmatic purposes. All right. Any other questions? All right. Thanks.